Hi, I'm Faye.
Hi, and I'm Tracy. On this episode of More Better with Tracy and Faye, we are talking about team leaders, direct managers. They are the secret sauce to communication in your organization or the biggest detriment. Stick around and find out more.
Okay. Tracy, leaders, secret sauce or biggest detriment? This or
Well,
that?
this or that, or both. Well, here's what really got this topic top of mind for me is there was a recent Gallup survey that came out called Global Leaders Report: What Followers Want. Followers. That's hilarious. In an organization, I don't think of my team as my followers.
Yeah, are we a
But
leader of a cult or
exactly. But let's see what it had to say. What it had to say was that next to a person's family, the most trusted source for information is their direct manager at work.
gross?
I mean, granted, there's a gap
Yeah,
between trust from family and trust from managers, but the truth is, managers are number 2 on the list. They hold an incredibly important role to an individual's work life.
that makes sense. I think because firstly, there's a power dynamic, right? So if you have a leader, you want to make sure that you have your job, you keep them happy, all that sort of stuff. Like they have authority over you,
Yeah.
which is obviously influences every aspect. You want to make sure you have a job they manage, or they are influential in terms of your career growth, your development at a company, whether you're actually like happy in the 8+ hours you spend working at your job. So yeah, I can see that. I totally see
Yeah,
that.
it goes back to that old saying that, we've heard from in the HR space for a long time, which is when people quit, they're not quitting a company, they're not quitting their salary, they're typically quitting their manager
Yeah.
because of the importance that they play. So I guess what this is saying is they really do play an oversized, I guess that's a judgment statement, but an oversized importance in someone's work life. Because I could be working at a company that I love. I love the company, I love the brand, I love what they stand for, I like the leadership. But if my direct manager makes life miserable for me, then I will leave.
Yeah. No, totally. I think one thing that comes up for me when I think about people being promoted into team leads, rec manager, people leader roles is that often they're promoted because of their expertise, right? Their expertise,
They're
their
technical.
knowledge. Maybe they've managed a really cool project. They've led a project or a program. But I don't know if people are necessarily promoted based on their leadership skills.
Well, this was a conversation that I heard when I entered the workforce in the 1900s.
That's what you young people think
That's
that we
right.
came
The
from.
1990s, yeah, which is about 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, 1,000 years ago.
Um, there was that question. And it's still there today. I really thought it would get solved, but it's not. And it's a question I'm asking you, but I'm asking myself. What's the most important skill that a manager needs to have to lead their team? They need to be able to communicate.
Exactly.
They need to, and I'm not even talking about the written communication. They need to be able to communicate to their team and the individuals on their team how the work that they do relates to the broader organization. They need to understand where they fit. They need to understand where they influence. They need to understand how changes around the organization are affecting their team or their role. And those communication skills, when you've got people that get promoted into manager skills, into a management role, and they've got those skills, their teams are so much happier and more productive, and they feel less stress and all the things.
Yeah, and you can see that difference when you have a leader who has those skills. They have to be able to have hard conversations. You have to be able to care about people's careers, right? Like, and not just like, oh, I'm going to move you through the ladder or whatever that is. It's about understanding where people are coming from. Yeah, I think and sort of being able to read the room. It's not just about announcements and pronouncements. That's not leadership typically,
Yeah,
right? I think that
exactly.
the leadership happens in the moments, it's a cliche, but the moments that matter, when I don't trust something, or when I'm
Yeah.
scared of something, or when your team is feeling malaise, if you will, because of what's happening in their external environments, or in
Mhm.
the economy, or whatever that is. It's being able to tap into that and be open. And I don't know if, I know that oftentimes, especially large companies, they'll have like leadership development kind of programs, and maybe they touch on some of those things. But as you say, so much of leading people is about communication. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Yeah. So when we think about a big organizational event, a negative one, say there's a, part of your company is being sold off or shut down. People are losing their jobs. Maybe it impacts your team, maybe not your whole team, but maybe half your team has got to go because of this change that's happening corporately. Think about the importance of that direct manager in those circumstances. So let's say everybody hears from the CEO what's happening. You all hear at the same time, and that's good. But who do I turn to next? I could turn to you, my colleague, and then we could just have chatter about what's happening, but neither one of us actually know anything more. We are typically feeding each other's fears about
Mhm.
what might happen. Or I could turn to our team manager and ask them and say, what does this mean for us? What does this mean for me? And if that manager doesn't have the skill, hasn't been taught how to have that conversation, then the answer might be, well, you saw the message from the CEO. I guess we'll find out more down the road. I've heard that.
Mhm.
And what does that do? Well, I'm just back talking to Faye. I'm just back talking to
Yeah,
you
I was
going,
gonna.
I don't know what this means. And this work that we've got going on, it doesn't feel that important anymore.
Well, now I'm distracted,
Because
right?
now
Like
I'm
now
just,
I'm distracted.
and how
I
do I
can't.
know that that work is even going to be relevant in three
Exactly.
months' time? So why am I going to put my energy toward it?
That's right.
And when one of the things that we do a lot, that you've done a ton of in recent years, is giving managers that information ahead of everybody else finding out the message from the CEO to enable the manager to have those conversations. But it still takes the manager
Yes.
to use the information, the resources that's been provided to them. How have you seen that play out? Because I know you've done a lot of scripting and manage your key points. And how have you seen that in both the greatest effect and also where maybe not so good?
Well, I'll start with the not so good. They don't see the managers having a role. So they're a recipient,
Right.
just as an employee. I've seen scenarios where they don't really give the manager anything other than here's the message. Maybe it's the, hour before the announcements or pronouncements. Here's the message we're going to send. How does that arm your manager
Yeah.
with additional context? Are they able to ask questions that they might know their team might be asking,
Yeah.
that helps them answer them. So I'd say like that's the worst case scenario. I was about to say it's an extreme scenario, but I don't know if it is an extreme scenario. I think it
I
does
think it's
happen.
I
It
think it's
happens.
really common.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think in organizations, especially organizations without an internal communications department,
Yeah. Yeah.
they they don't have the expertise on staff to say you need to do more than just give them a 10 minutes heads up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I've been very lucky to work with organizations that are open to sort of looking at how do we help managers become more effective communicators with their teams,
Yeah.
regardless of the situation. And my approach has been, how do we make it easy for the manager to have those conversations?
Yeah.
So that's one approach. So those could look like, I've seen tactics like, I worked for one company and we had a leader center on our intranet, as an example, a dedicated space for leaders.
Mhm.
I think we called it the leader center. And it was, all the things that a leader might know about, mostly HR, because
Mhm.
it's comp and it's performance and all of those types of
Yeah.
reminders. And then we had a place And there were other things like from an operational standpoint. So those are like more tactical things. And then we had a mechanism to drive them there because guess what? Leaders are not spending their time on an intranet, even more so. So a mechanism like a dedicated, I'm going to use the N word, newsletter,
Not a
but it was
newsletter.
a
Whoa,
newsletter, but it was
whoa.
effective, right? As long as your newsletter is like simple, short, to the point, and you're driving them
Relevant,
to
relevant,
relevant
relevant,
and
relevant.
timely, right? It's got like
Yeah.
relevant and timely.
Yeah.
So you're driving them appropriately. There's a consistency to it. But anyway, it became a practice and it became something leaders would expect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you're giving them a nudge to like, hey, this is what's going on, or hey, remember this. So that's in a general sense what I've worked with one company to do for a project, for projects or programs where there's a lot of change. Especially I've worked with we've given leaders I call, you've heard me say this before, if you hear this, say this.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does, it really arms leaders with a very simple, maybe it's a living document, again, depending on your program, but it arms them with language to say,
Yes.
if you're hearing this from your staff, from you're hearing this from others. So rumors, like you can address myth, you can use it as a myth buster. You can use it to address kind of those tricky like situations. Here's some language that you can
Mm-hmm.
use to address that in the moment, because we know that especially when it's a hard conversation, it's hard to find those words. No matter like,
Really
and
hard.
yeah. And I think and going back to scripting, yeah, we've done scripts. Again, it depends on the situation, but I've done scripts where we've had to like, you know I'll call it reductions in force, i.e. layoffs, right?
Yeah.
So if we have to make change or even changes, like you're moving from this team to that, or we're making some changes to your role and you have an idea,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's not going to be the most favorable like news. We've done message, giving people actual scripts. This is what happens if you have
Mm-hmm.
someone on leave. This is the phone call you make. When someone's
Yeah.
on vacation, this is the phone call and voicemail you make. If you have someone, you're in the office and you're on 101, these are the words you can use. And yes, leaders can use those scripts. They may not. You want to keep them on script or you're on message, because like those scripts would include all the key messages or the messages that
Yeah.
matter in that moment. But it gives them a tool. So I'm always thinking about how do we make it as easy as possible for leaders to communicate what we want them to communicate, rather than have them scramble and not know, and then maybe even check out because it's just too much.
Yes. Yes. That's a question that came up recently, actually, with an HR leader who asked that question about how to harness managers to do the work that they need to do in terms of being a leader with this really difficult communication. And there's a couple things that came out in that conversation that we had. And one is that managers are people, and they are going to have a reaction to the change that's coming. Maybe it's not affecting their team, but it's affecting their colleagues and their
Mhm.
colleagues' team. Or maybe it is affecting their team, and that makes it even more difficult. And we need to recognize that managers as a cohort need an opportunity to process,
Yes.
perhaps to have a conversation to say, I don't like this. I don't like what's happening. I don't want to have to do it. Why are you making me? I don't want to. But we need to allow people that opportunity. And
Yes.
one of the things that you have said before, and you're right, in through that change process, we can't skip over that little section where people are reeling from the bad news. We can't just go, okay, we're laying off 25% of the staff on Wednesday, and Tracey, here's the 6 people you need to lay off. Go do it.
Get over it.
Get over it. It's just not realistic. It's like, let's just break it. Let's even get away from is it the right thing, is it the wrong thing? It's just not realistic. That's not the
Yeah.
way humans operate. So you need to give people time. And when I've been involved in major reductions in force, big changes corporately, one of the things that we would do is have basically an all hands meeting of all of the impacted managers, the team leads, and we have that conversation. And they're there with the leaders of the organization, C-suite, CEO. And HR is there because they have an important role to play in this. And communication is there to help provide the language so that they don't have to scramble, as you said. And legal is there because
Yeah,
that's one of the
important.
reasons you want people to stay on script, is because from a legal perspective, when you're doing these very difficult actions and you're having these really difficult conversations corporately, legally, you have to mitigate your risk here. So you don't want some manager, Tracey, going off and going, well, you know what, Faye, I have to lay you off, I'm super sorry, but we're going to do this, that, and the other thing for you. And we're not doing that for everybody, but we're going to do it for you because here's what's happening in the background. All these things that would have the lawyers in the company, their heads blowing off. So you give them a script to help the manager and to create an environment where all of these really difficult conversations happen as efficiently and uniformly as possible. But recognizing that managers are human beings, they're not just robots. And so, like the cascade, please cascade this message to your team. Boop.
Yeah, and I
I
think that
play no role in that. That's just, you might as well send it direct.
well, I hate the cascade, right? Like, oh my God, can we talk about the cascade in a minute?
Yes.
For a minute? Wow. I did, it's funny. We used to do that. I think you and I did a few of those, and at a bank.
Mhm.
I was surprised, fast forward 10 years later, that that is still a thing. At
Mhm.
and it's industry agnostic, whether you're yeah, I'm just surprised that that's still a thing. Like, I gotta tell you first. I get that we tell leaders first, and then we just ask. Like, all we're doing is we're asking leaders to punt it to their team.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what message does that send to a team? That the senior leader above, the leader of my leader can't either talk to me, or my leader has to use that can't doesn't have the words, so they're just sharing it. I don't know. I think if you and I know I'm crapping on the cascade right now. It's just like I'm just surprised it's still a thing. I'd rather if that's and if that's a thing, fine. I can't fix that. What are we really asking leaders to do? We're asking them to communicate this very important message to their teams. So why not arm them with better context, a message that's in their own voice or words? Why not, as you said, you talked about a forum. What
Yeah.
I've seen before too are like office hours, right? Like office hours to maybe a small group of people leaders to sort of hash out, as you say, process it for themselves before they simply punt it over to their team. Okay, the cascade is real.
Well, and here's the problem.
I don't like it.
Another problem with the cascade, and it goes to the inherent skill of managers. Those managers who are great communicators, who are good leaders on their team, they communicate well, their team trusts them. They can take the
Mhm.
information, they can cascade, they can share it and provide the context that is meaningful for their team. But then there's a lot of other managers who either don't do it, they simply don't. They're like, my team heard it from the CEO. There's nothing I can add to that. This cascade document just repeats what the CEO said, and they're often not wrong. So there's nothing else to say. So then they don't say anything else. And then that team, they just talk amongst themselves and feel this mistrust with their manager and potentially with the leadership team. What can we do for managers, both those that are the good communicators, but those who struggle? How can we actually help them beyond please cascade this message? How do we arm them, as you said, with things that are meaningful? Because maybe there was all hands town hall and everybody heard the message from the CEO all at once about what's coming down the pike. Great. That's a really good way to do it. But that people are going to turn around and immediately say to their manager, what does it mean for us? And if all we've given them is a message to cascade, then I don't see any winning there.
No, it's not effective. Or the cascade, and one more
Oh, one more thing
one
about the
more thing about the
cascade.
cascade. uh, the cascade, I think, also reinforces hierarchy in your organization and
Yeah,
culture, right? So if that's
yeah,
the kind of culture, i.e., they talk to me or they talk to them, they talk to other people, then they talk, like, then fine. Your action of cascade has reinforced that hierarchy, and you are now reflecting the culture that you want to cultivate.
yes.
So, so I think that's an important element when you think about cascade. Um, what was your question? What can we do? What can we do? Oh yeah, what can we do? Well, I think for the leaders who are good communicators, I think we learn from them. Like, I call them bright spots. So how do we learn from them? Like, what makes them a good communicator? What are they comfortable with? How do we continue to arm them, whether it's with, you hear that, say this, or those types of tools, or with key messages? How do we continue to support them? Like, we being communicators, I'm guessing, if we are maybe the head of a program or head of a project or a change lead on some sort of thing, or even an internal communicator, how do we sort of tap into that secret sauce, if you will? I think that's one thing we can learn from leaders or people leaders. For those who don't, I don't want to do it. I think we need to understand their fear. So fear, whether it's like, I'm going to look stupid, I don't know how to do this, or I think my job is only to do what I was doing before, which was maybe a subject matter expert in some sort of field, or I was an engineer or an analyst, whatever those things are. I think that's a bigger, frankly, that's a bigger problem than a communications problem. But nonetheless, I think we need to tap into, well, why aren't they doing it? Like, what is holding them back? And also, maybe share or encourage. I don't know if those are the words, but communication is something that that they can learn, that we that can be taught, right?
Hmm.
Sometimes people fall into a mindset of like, well, I'm not a great communicator, so, but I'm a really good engineer. I'm not a
Yeah.
good communicator, but I'm really good at creating or leading projects.
And yet, and yet, every single job posting for a manager says must be an excellent communicator. And that's what I come back to ultimately is it's part of your job.
Yes.
We as an organization, again, we'll go to the big, the worst, big layoffs, 25% of the staff being laid off. We get that it sucks. And we're going to give you a forum, an opportunity to express your displeasure and your discomfort and perhaps your fears, not hopefully, but to create an environment where people can say, well, actually, I'm really uncomfortable doing this, or I have these fears attached to it. And then you give them the resources, whether that's scripting or training or
Hmm.
both. And then you say, go do your job, because it's part of your job
Yes.
as a manager. And some managers embrace that, and some managers will just forward the cascade. And that's where you're going to see weak branches in your company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and maybe those weak branches are exposed through engagement scores about communication from my leader, right? Like there's there's ways to measure that. Again, I hope that's something organizations do to measure the effectiveness of communication from people leaders. 'Cause like you
Yeah.
said before at the outset, it's so influential, right? Like, a leader
Mm-hmm.
can make or break whether you stay at a company, can make or break whether you move, that whether you yeah, like, well, whether you move in your career.
Yeah.
Um and people know that.
I recently was had access to some engagement scores for an organization, and there was one part of their business that had much lower scores than the other, notably lower scores. And I did not have access to anything related to communication, questions specific to communication. That just wasn't part of the report that was shared with me. But I was doing some interviews, and in speaking with a couple of people that were in that line of business at that organization, huge mistrust. between the work that they're doing and the leadership up the line of that business line. And it was really telling, and it was not surprising to me. Because communication, whether engagement surveys or any other kind of research, says we are measuring you on communication. So much of communication is baked into those questions in ways that people don't necessarily see. I have the resources to do my job effectively. I feel like I have the knowledge I need to do my job. I understand how my job relates to organizational goals. Questions like that come up in engagement surveys, and they are communication questions.
I was just about to say that, like the idea that the gap between the trust gap, right, between those employees and people leaders, if you will, or leadership. I don't know what those levels are, but I think effective communication can help. Right. So every interaction you have with your team. So if you're starting from a place of like no trust or very little trust, guess what? Communication, whether it's an interaction on a one-on-one, whether it's being transparent about what's going on, whether it's about, addressing rumors or feelings on your team because of something happening. Those are all opportunities to build that trust up in not only you as a leader, but also in the company. So again, like going back to that stat around so influential, right? But you also carry the burden of like, bad communication only like adds salt to the wound, right? It only adds more if you don't, like, the opposite of those things, right? If you dismiss your employees because there's some rumors around and don't worry, like that's not happening or whatever that is, or if you set a tone that you're not going to say anything, or that you can't say anything. I mean, I always tell leaders, like, when they're not sure how to respond to something, we often advise it's okay to say, I don't know, and commit, but I'm going to find out and I'm going to commit by this day. And then even if the day comes and I'm trying to get those answers and I'm still working on it. That's transparency and that's trust. That's how you build trust. No, I was just going to say, like, but again, just going back to that, like, that's the opportunity there. The opportunity is either the opportunity is either you have an opportunity to build trust in all of those different elements, or you can wipe it away.
Well, and you had said earlier that you said effective communication. You use that. And that, I think, is that word effective. Not everybody understands what that is. Very often they don't. And we know this because we teach it. And so many people still have this idea that communication is, I told people things.
Yeah.
That goes back to the manager cascade. I told people things. That's not effective communication. That's just telling people something. Effective communication means that there's two sides to this. I'm telling you something for, maybe I'm answering your question, or maybe I'm getting ahead of your question. But it is inherent on me to make sure that you understand it, that you are choosing to act on it, that it doesn't leave you with more questions, that people feel satisfied with whatever that exchange was. And that exchange is not one way. Effective communication is never one way. You have to think about that audience. I mean, I don't want to get into the technicalities of what we teach when we teach that, but effective communication is not told them.
Well, and the word exchange is critical here, right? Because that idea that I'm telling you something and I want to make sure you understand it. And guess what? In order for you to understand it means you're going to ask questions. You're going to have thoughts and feelings and ideas about what we've talked about. And you're going to express those to me. And then I have to go, I have to address that or figure that out again. But it's the exchange that matters. Communication at its very nature is an exchange. Yes. It's not an pronouncement that this is happening and thou shalt be happy about it.
Yes. And that's that role, coming back to that manager of, when I'm feeling uncertainty or mistrust related to something happening in the company or related to my job, I'm going to turn to my manager first. And that's what the Gallup survey said.
Yeah.
You're going to turn to your manager first, because your family cannot answer the question about what's happening at work. So at work, who do you turn to? You turn to your manager. So
That's right.
you, manager, have such a vital role to play, because how you choose to answer and engage with that question will determine your effectiveness as a manager. It is a determinant of the engagement on your team. And it's the determinant of whether or not these people on your team want to stick around or not.
I love that place. How can you come from a place where a manager, how can they be more caring, supportive, effective with their team? And perhaps if I were to offer a piece of advice, if you are leading a project or you're leading a program that involves especially big changes and there's people leaders there, they are a conduit for your communication.
Yeah.
They're not just like the pass through. So if we ask, how might we support them in that role, then the tactics will follow. So it could be a script, it could be document key messages, it could be a cascade, it could be office hours, a forum. I think that if we come from that place, putting ourselves in the leader's spot and go, how could we create more effective leaders? I know you use that word again, but how might we support people leaders or people in those roles to be more effective with their teams? And I think the tactics and approach will follow.
Something else showed up for me that I think has been missing in our conversation. And we, as the communication people or the project leads, can ask managers, how do you think this will land for your team?
Nice.
What is the impact going to be on your team? You, because you have this unique position, can actually tell us, because we might think, the royal we leading the project or the communications team, we think it's going to land badly for these 5 reasons. Typically, I'm going to be skeptical and assume it's going to land badly. But this has actually happened. I can't think of the example, but it has happened to me, where the managers will go, oh, people are going to love this. They are? I thought they'd hate it. Oh my God, my team has been complaining about that process for the last 8 years. So we are super excited that this is going to happen. This is going to be coming. And you're like, oh, my job just got easier. But that's the other role that managers play, is they have insight that can help inform how communication is developed for this project or this initiative. And we have to remember that, because that is respecting their role and their expertise on their team.
It's funny that you say that. I've seen the opposite, where the program, and it's easy to sort of like your own stuff.
Yeah.
Right? To say, oh, it's going to change this process. They no longer have to do manual triplicate carbon copies of X, Y, and Z. They're going to move this widget from here to here. They're going to love it. And then the people manager layer goes, oh my gosh, this is disruptive. Yeah. They're going to hate this, or this is going to impact this other thing. I think, but same point though. Tap into your people leaders as experts in their teams, in the team's experiences, and ask how might that land for their teams, and what can we do to support them.
And as you say, and then the tactics follow. I just always assume that any change is going to be met with negativity. That's my starting point, because, it's been my experience. Because I think a long time ago, I rid myself of the fallacy that if I think something is better, so will everybody else.
No, the fantasy still lives on in Project Land.
Working so hard to make this new process, and people are going to be so happy because we've been working so hard.
Yeah.
And you go,
like, no one knows. No one cares.
They don't care. they don't care, know. And they hate the change. So,
yeah, that's
thanks
right.
for your hard work. But they hate
that's
it.
right. Thanks for the past year.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. And with that, I'm Faye.
And I'm Tracey. Join us next time for more blathering on More Better with Tracey and Faye.